The Manhattan skyscraper horrorist was a chilly Monday morning in Manhattan, the kind of day where everyone's in a rush, clutching coffee and scrolling through emails before even reaching their desks. Inside a 47-story office tower, a woman named Suzanne stepped into the elevator like she had hundreds of times before. She pressed lobby, smiled politely at a coworker, and the doors closed behind her. Seconds later, the elevator jolted violently. The hum of the motor turned into a roar. It wasn't going down. It was shooting upward. Fast. The digital numbers flickered past. 6th floor, 10th, 18th. Too fast to even register. Suzanne screamed, slamming the emergency stop, but the buttons were dead. The others tried the doors, but they wouldn't budge. By the 30th floor, the acceleration became unbearable. The pressure pinned everyone to the floor. Coffee cups and briefcases floating in the air, as if gravity had forgotten them. And then, just as suddenly as it began, silence. A split second later, impact. The elevator slammed into the roof shaft with a metallic scream that echoed through the entire building. Fire alarms went off. Office workers froze, not realizing that above them, an elevator had become a steel coffin. Rescue teams worked for hours to pry open the doors, and what they found was devastating. Investigators later discovered a failed speed governor, a tiny mechanical part that had been flagged for maintenance weeks earlier, but never replaced. What was supposed to be an ordinary elevator ride became one of New York's most horrifying workplace tragedies, a haunting reminder that sometimes the smallest failure can unleash the biggest nightmare. The Shanghai shopping mall tragedy. It was an ordinary afternoon at a busy shopping mall in Shanghai. Families shopping, kids laughing, and the hum of chatter echoing through the glass atrium. On the 5th floor, a young mother stepped onto a moving escalator with her 2-year-old son in her arms, smiling as the boy giggled and pointed at the colorful lights below. Halfway up, everything seemed perfectly normal, until the floor beneath her feet gave way. A metal access panel at the top of the escalator suddenly collapsed inward, revealing a spinning pit of gears and steel beneath. In a flash, the woman's right leg was swallowed by the machine. She screamed, clutching her son tightly as mall staff rushed to help. 2 workers managed to grab the child just as she pushed him into their arms. Moments before, she was pulled completely under. Witnesses said the sound of tearing metal and screams filled the entire floor. The escalator kept moving, grinding and shuddering as if trying to consume itself. Maintenance workers hit the emergency stop, but it was too late. The escalator froze, silent except for the sound of people crying. When rescuers finally disassembled the machinery, it took over 2 hours to recover her body. Security footage of the incident went viral within hours, sparking nationwide outrage. Investigators later found that the metal panel had been loose for weeks, and maintenance staff had simply covered it with tape, ignoring repeated warnings. The young mother became a tragic symbol of heroism, the woman who gave her life to save her son. Even now, that mall has a memorial plaque near the escalator's base, reminding everyone that one moment of negligence can destroy an entire future. The Texas hospital incident. It was a quiet morning at a hospital in Lubbock, Texas. Nurses moving briskly through the halls, doctors making rounds, and patients waking to the sound of rolling carts. For veteran nurse Olivia Carr, it was supposed to be a routine shift change. She stepped into the staff elevator, a cup of coffee in hand, heading to the lower floor to collect lab results. As the doors began to close, another nurse called out, "Hold it!" Olivia reached to press the open button, and that's when it happened. The elevator suddenly lurched upward with the doors still open. The other nurse froze as Olivia was slammed between the rising car and the stationary floor frame. The sound was horrific. Metal grinding, alarms blaring, people screaming. Hospital staff rushed toward the elevator, but it had jammed halfway up the shaft, trapping Olivia's body. The entire floor fell silent, except for the shrill emergency bell echoing down the corridor. For nearly 30 minutes, firefighters and engineers fought to pry the elevator loose. When they finally reached her, it was too late. She had been crushed instantly, dying in the very place she'd spent years saving lives. The investigation uncovered shocking negligence. The hospital had received multiple warnings about that exact elevator. It had malfunctioned weeks before, even closing its doors on staff members. But rather than shutting it down, the maintenance company marked it safe for limited use to avoid delays. The tragedy led to major lawsuits and new safety protocols across the state. But for the staff who worked there, the haunting memory remained. The nurse who stepped into an elevator meant to save lives, and instead lost hers because someone couldn't be bothered to fix a switch. The London luxury apartment death. It was a crisp autumn evening in London. The kind of night when the city's skyline glows gold against the fog. Inside one of its most expensive apartment towers, residents were returning home from work sipping wine and watching the lights of the Thames below. Among them was James Parker, a 32-year-old investment banker who had just moved into his new penthouse suite. The building's glass elevator, sleek, quiet, and panoramic, was its pride and joy. You could see the entire city as you ascended, a moving view worth millions. But that night, the beauty hid a deadly secret. At 8:46 p.m., James stepped inside the elevator after a brief chat with the concierge. The doors closed softly and the car began to rise. Smooth, elegant, perfect. But halfway up, something went terribly wrong. A grinding sound filled the shaft, followed by a loud snap. The lights flickered and suddenly the elevator began free-falling. 30 floors. In less than 5 seconds. Witnesses outside heard the shriek of twisting cables echo through the glass tower. The elevator crashed into the base of the shaft with such force that the floor cracked open. When rescuers arrived, the scene was catastrophic. The investigation revealed the horrifying truth. The elevator's safety brakes had been manually disabled earlier that day by a maintenance contractor. He had been working on another elevator and temporarily bypassed the brake system for testing, then forgot to reset it. James's death sparked national outrage. A building designed for luxury had turned into a death trap because of a single human error. Today, that tower still stands, but residents say they can't ride its glass elevator without thinking of the man who took its final ride. Straight into darkness, the Tokyo office nightmare Tokyo. A city where precision, technology, and punctuality define everyday life. Inside a towering corporate building in Shinjuku, the elevators ran like clockwork, carrying thousands of workers up and down every day. No one ever questioned their safety, until one rainy Thursday morning in 2006. A 19-year-old intern named Kenta Suzuki was running late for work. He sprinted through the lobby, bowing apologetically as he slipped into the elevator just as the doors began to close. But before they could seal, something went horribly wrong. The elevator suddenly started rising, with the doors still wide open. In that split second, Kenta's foot got caught on the edge of the moving platform. The elevator didn't stop. It kept climbing. His body was dragged upward, crushed between the floor and the wall. The entire incident happened in less than 5 seconds. Co-workers nearby heard the metallic scream and ran toward the shaft, only to find blood smeared across the doorframe and Kenta motionless. The building's emergency systems failed to trigger an automatic halt. When engineers pried open the doors, the silence in that hallway was unbearable. What investigators discovered later shocked Japan. The elevator had been manufactured by a major company, but its maintenance had been outsourced to a smaller firm that skipped safety tests to save money. Faulty wiring caused the elevator to misread door sensors. The system literally didn't know the doors were open when it began to move. The case made national headlines and led to a full-scale government inquiry into elevator safety standards. To this day, that tragedy is taught in engineering courses across Japan. A brutal reminder that when precision fails, even the smallest glitch can take an innocent life in the blink of an eye. The Brazil construction site accident. It was a blistering afternoon in Sao Paulo. Concrete dust in the air. The sound of drills echoing across a half-built skyscraper. Construction workers shouted orders in Portuguese. Cranes swung overhead and deep inside the structure. Two men prepared to load heavy steel beams into a freight elevator. The elevator was old. Its paint chipped, its warning signs faded. But deadlines were tight and no one wanted to slow down. The foreman shouted, "Just get it up to the 20th floor, fast!" So they did. They rolled in nearly a ton of steel, far more than the elevator was ever rated to carry. At first, everything seemed fine. The gate slammed shut, the motor groaned, and the lift began to rise. But by the time it reached the 10th floor, a faint pop echoed through the shaft. One of the main suspension cables began to unravel. The workers inside felt a jolt, then weightlessness. The entire car plunged. The elevator dropped 15 floors in seconds, the steel beams shifting violently inside, crushing everything in their path. Witnesses said it sounded like an explosion when it hit the basement level. A deep, metallic roar that shook the entire structure. When rescue teams reached the bottom, they found twisted beams, shattered walls, and almost nothing left of the elevator itself. Both workers were killed instantly. The investigation was damning. The elevator hadn't been inspected in over 3 years. Maintenance logs were falsified, and the overload alarm system had been disconnected to avoid unnecessary interruptions. Their deaths led to Brazil's strict new construction safety laws. But for the men on that site, it was too late. 2 lives lost because saving time mattered more than following rules. The sound of that collapse still haunts the workers who were there that day. The Dubai Hotel Freefall was a glittering summer night in Dubai, the kind of night where the city looked like it was made of gold. Inside the luxurious Al Zahra Sky Resort, guests in designer clothes filled the rooftop lounge, sipping champagne and taking photos against the skyline. In the center of the lobby stood the hotel's pride, a glass elevator that offered a breathtaking ride up 60 floors to the pool deck. At 9:12 p.m., a group of 8 guests stepped in laughing, music playing from someone's phone. The elevator doors closed, the floor indicator lit up, and then the lights flickered. A low rumble echoed from above. Someone joked nervously, "Guess even Dubai breaks sometimes." Then came the snap. A sound like a gunshot cracked through the shaft. The elevator shuddered violently, then dropped. 1 second of weightlessness, and then another, and then full-blown freefall. 60 floors. The screams were deafening. The lights went black, and still the car kept falling. The impact was catastrophic. The entire hotel shook, sprinklers burst, alarms wailed. When rescuers reached the bottom, the elevator was a crushed shell of steel and glass. Every passenger inside had died instantly. The investigation stunned the world. The elevator had just passed inspection 2 weeks earlier, but records revealed something horrifying. A subcontractor had swapped out the primary suspension cables for cheaper, untested replacements to cut costs. Dubai's authorities swiftly arrested multiple contractors, and the hotel was shut down permanently. Today, the building stands empty, abandoned behind sealed glass. Locals say that late at night, if you walk past it, you can still hear faint music echoing from the shaft, a haunting rhythm that once carried laughter all the way up and screams all the way down. The Chicago office worker. It was a cold Monday morning in downtown Chicago. The skyscrapers cut through the fog. The streets buzzed with coffee-fueled commuters. And inside the Marshall and Finch Insurance Building, employees rushed to clock in before 9 a.m. Among them was Lisa Grant, 42-year-old claims adjuster known for always being early and always taking the same elevator to the 23rd floor. That morning, Lisa stepped into the elevator with 3 other coworkers. They were mid-conversation when the doors suddenly jolted and froze halfway shut. The floor indicator flickered, then went blank. Before anyone could react, the elevator lurched upward, then violently down. Lisa reached for the emergency stop, but the button didn't respond. The metal groaned as if alive, cables screeching from above. The car dropped several floors before catching again, then fell once more, this time harder. Papers flew, people screamed, and then silence. When the dust settled, the elevator had slammed into the basement level. 2 people survived with broken bones. Lisa wasn't one of them. The city's inspectors later revealed what happened. The elevator's governor rope, the key safety system that controls speed, had frayed to the point of snapping. The maintenance logs claimed it was replaced the month before, but that was a lie. The building's management company had forged the paperwork to avoid a $25,000 repair. The tragedy led to a citywide audit of old office buildings. Inspectors found dozens of elevators in similar condition, ticking time bombs, hidden in plain sight. Lisa's story became a wake-up call for every commuter who's ever stepped into an elevator without thinking twice. Because in Chicago that winter, everyone realized one terrifying truth. The only thing between you and a 20-story fall is a cable you've never seen and someone you've never met. The Thailand Shopping Mall, Incident Bangkok, a city of chaos and color, where every building pulses with life. Inside the crowded Lotus Plaza Mall, shoppers moved shoulder to shoulder, families carrying bags of clothes and street food. It was a Sunday, the busiest day of the week, and every elevator was running non-stop between its 10 buzzing floors. On the 5th floor, a group of 6 people, including 2 children, stepped into elevator number 4. A few seconds after the doors shut, something felt off. The floor indicator flickered. The car jerked. A faint grinding noise echoed from above. A man pressed the open button, but it didn't respond. Then suddenly, silence. And in the next heartbeat, the elevator dropped. People screamed as the car free fell several floors before slamming to a sudden stop, and then dropping again. The cables snapped one after another, like the sound of a zipper tearing apart. By the time it hit the bottom, the impact was so violent that rescuers said the steel doors had bent outward like foil. 3 people died instantly. The rest were pulled out hours later, critically injured. But what investigators found afterward was almost more disturbing than the accident itself. The mall had installed fake safety certificates in every elevator. None of them had passed inspection in over 5 years. Maintenance workers had been bribed to sign off on forged safety reports, all to avoid costly repairs that might have closed the mall temporarily. The tragedy sparked nationwide outrage and forced Thailand's government to overhaul its public safety inspection laws. But for the victims' families, the reforms were meaningless. Their loved ones had stepped into what they thought was a modern elevator, and instead, into a death trap. And now that elevator shaft remains sealed, touched, a silent tomb beneath one of Bangkok's busiest malls. The Moscow apartment horror. It was a gray, snow-covered morning in Moscow. The old apartment blocks stood like frozen relics from the Soviet era, tall, cold, and crumbling. Inside one of them, an elderly woman named Irina Petrova carried 2 bags of groceries up to her flat on the 9th floor. The elevator was slow, dimly lit, and creaked with every floor, but she'd used it for years without a second thought. She pressed the button. The doors slid open with their usual metallic groan. She stepped in, humming softly to herself, balancing her groceries. As the doors began to close, something clicked. Then another sound, sharper, faster, a snap. Before Irina could even look up, the elevator dropped straight down the shaft. Witnesses heard a thunderous crash that echoed through the building. The lights flickered. Neighbors rushed out, screaming for help. But when they pried open the doors at the bottom floor, The sight was unbearable. The elevator had collapsed completely, crumpled like paper. Irina never stood a chance. When investigators arrived, they found that all 6 suspension cables had corroded beyond repair. Maintenance reports showed the system hadn't been serviced in over 7 years. The building management had repeatedly ignored resident complaints about strange noises, claiming they didn't have the budget for elevator repairs. The worst part? A week before the accident, another tenant had called the city's housing authority to report that same elevator felt like it was falling. No one came. The tragedy made national headlines in Russia, sparking outrage over neglected infrastructure in aging Soviet buildings. But for the people living there, the fear never left. Every creak, every shake of the elevator became a reminder. In Moscow's decaying towers, even a trip home could turn into your final descent. The South Korea parking garage incident Seoul. A city built on efficiency, technology, and speed. Beneath its shimmering skyscrapers lies a maze of underground parking garages, each with freight elevators designed to lift cars between levels. It's a system that runs like clockwork, until one night in 2018, when everything went horrifyingly wrong. At around 11:45 p.m., a 37-year-old office worker named Jun-Ho Kim parked his sedan after a late shift. He was exhausted and just wanted to get home. As usual, he drove into the vehicle lift, an elevator designed to carry both car and driver up to the exit ramp. The doors closed behind him. The platform began to rise, and Jun-Ho pulled out his phone to check messages. But halfway up, something jolted. A loud metallic snap echoed through the shaft. The lift shuddered, stopped, then started rising again, faster this time. Jun-Ho barely had time to look up before the entire elevator broke free of its cables. The car plummeted 3 stories straight down. When it hit, the impact crushed the vehicle into an unrecognizable heap. The force was so great that concrete cracked across the floor. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but the scene was chaos. Mangled steel, smoke, and twisted elevator parts. Jun-Ho was killed instantly. When engineers examined the wreckage, they found a horrifying truth. The main suspension bolts had been replaced during routine maintenance, but with non-certified parts purchased from a discount supplier. The replacement pieces couldn't handle the elevator's weight, and when one failed, the rest followed like dominoes. The tragedy shook South Korea's safety community. Strict new regulations were introduced for vehicle elevators, but for Jun-Ho and his family, it was too late. One careless substitution, one shortcut, had turned a simple parking routine into a fatal freefall. Now that garage stands sealed, its elevator shaft welded shut. A silent reminder that in a city obsessed with speed, safety is often the first thing left behind. The London hospital elevator tragedy. London. Early morning rain tapped against the windows of St. Bartholomew's Hospital, one of the city's oldest medical centers. Nurses rushed through the corridors. Patients lined up for morning scans, and the hum of hospital life filled every floor. Among the staff was Dr. Emily Clark, a 33-year-old surgeon known for her precision and calm under pressure. She had just finished a long night shift and stepped into the staff elevator to head down to the lobby. But that elevator, Elevator 3, had a dark history. Maintenance crews had complained about its jerky stops and delayed doors for months. The hospital board promised repairs next quarter. That morning, those promises ran out. As Dr. Clark pressed the ground floor button, the doors began to close. But suddenly, they stopped halfway. She leaned forward, trying to hit the button panel again. Without warning, the elevator shot upward, doors still wide open. The motion was so sudden it knocked her off balance. In a split second, the elevator slammed into the top of the shaft with brutal force, the doors still gaping open, crushing her between the cabin and the wall. Staff nearby heard the scream and the metallic crunch that followed. When paramedics pried the doors open minutes later, the scene was something no one in that hospital could ever forget. An investigation found that the elevator's door interlock sensor, the mechanism that prevents movement when doors are open, had been disabled during prior maintenance. To reduce false alarms, the oversight turned one of the safest systems in a hospital into a death trap. Her death sparked a full government inquiry into hospital infrastructure safety. In the weeks that followed, dozens of hospitals across the UK shut down their older elevators for emergency inspections. For the staff who knew her, that sound, the sharp metal clang of those elevator doors, still echoes in their memory. Because in the place meant to save lives, one careless decision had taken one instead. The Mexico City apartment elevator. Fire, Mexico City. A sprawling metropolis where luxury apartments rise beside crumbling tenements, each tower with its own story. Inside one of those towers, the Residencial del Sol, a small fire began late one humid night in 2019 and turned into one of the city's most horrifying elevator tragedies ever recorded. At around 2:30 a.m., residents smelled smoke coming from the lower floors. A short circuit in the basement's electrical panel had sparked a blaze. Alarms blared. People began rushing for the stairs. But on the 14th floor, a young mother named Isabella Cruz made a fatal choice. She grabbed her 6-year-old son, Mateo, and ran straight to the elevator. Panicked, she hit the ground floor button over and over as smoke filled the hallway. The doors shut, and for a brief moment she thought they were safe. But halfway down, the elevator jerked to a stop. The power failed completely. The lights went out. The fire's heat surged up the shaft like a chimney. The elevator's thin metal walls began to glow red from the heat. Isabella pressed the emergency intercom, but there was no response. Smoke poured in through the gaps. By the time firefighters reached them nearly 20 minutes later, the entire shaft had turned into a furnace. The elevator's cables had melted and the cabin had collapsed into the basement. Isabella and her son were found holding each other, victims not of the flames, but of smoke inhalation and heat exposure trapped inside what should have been an escape. The post-tragedy report revealed a horrifying truth. The building's fire suppression and emergency power systems hadn't worked in years. Inspectors had signed off the building anyway, after being bribed by the management company. The story dominated headlines across Mexico, forcing a national overhaul of building safety codes. But no amount of reform could erase the haunting image that firefighters described. A mother's final embrace inside a burning steel box that was supposed to save her. The Sydney office tower accident. It was a bright, breezy morning in Sydney's central business district. Another day of coffee runs, briefcases, and early meetings. The Harborside Executive Tower, a 40-story glass giant overlooking the water, was home to dozens of law firms and finance offices. Everything in that building ran on precision, from the security system to the spotless, high-speed elevators that whisked hundreds of professionals up and down daily. At 8:47 a.m., just as the lobby filled with morning traffic, the elevator on the west side began its ascent. Inside were 5 employees, including a 29-year-old accountant named Ryan Mitchell, who had just started his dream job the week before. The elevator hummed quietly, until it didn't. Halfway to the 20th floor, there was a pop, then a grinding screech. The lights flickered once, twice, and then everything went still. The elevator stalled midair. The passengers exchanged nervous glances. Someone pressed the emergency intercom, but it crackled uselessly. A few moments later, the unthinkable happened. The car dropped. It plummeted 7 floors before the emergency brakes kicked in, then failed again. It plunged another 10 floors before slamming into the mechanical buffer at the base of the shaft. With bone-shattering force, the impact mangled the steel frame and shattered the glass walls. 2 passengers were killed instantly. The others were critically injured. Ryan was among the survivors, but barely. Investigators discovered the cause: a software malfunction in the elevator's speed governor. The digital control system had received conflicting signals from 2 sensors, one reading ascending, the other stationary. The system froze, then defaulted into a freefall command, overriding the safety brakes. The case sent shockwaves through Australia. It turned out the software had a known glitch, but the elevator company hadn't yet rolled out the firmware patch, waiting to do it in the next maintenance cycle. For the people in that building, every elevator ride afterward felt like a gamble. And for Ryan, the lone survivor, the memory of that 7-second plunge still plays in his mind, over and over, like an endless descent that never truly stopped. The Egypt Hotel elevator collapsed Cairo, the city that never truly sleeps. Between the calls to prayer, the honking of taxis, and the glow of neon lights, life pulses constantly through its crowded streets. In the heart of downtown stood the Grand Oasis Hotel, a once luxurious building that had fallen into quiet neglect. The paint was peeling, the carpets worn, but tourists still came, drawn by its low rates and grand name. It was a warm summer evening in 2021 when tragedy struck. The hotel's main elevator, one of 3 old European models installed decades ago, was packed with 7 guests returning from dinner. Families, couples, travelers with heavy luggage. The elevator doors closed slowly, creaking, and the cabin began its slow descent from the 14th floor. Halfway down, a deep grinding noise echoed through the shaft. The lights flickered, then went out completely. One guest reached for the emergency button, but before he could press it, the entire elevator dropped. 14 floors. Witnesses in the lobby heard a thunderous crash followed by screams echoing up the shaft. The elevator had hit the basement with such force that the doors warped outward, concrete cracked, and smoke billowed from the impact. When rescuers arrived, 5 people were already dead. 2 others were rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The investigation revealed a story of corruption and neglect. The main hoist cables had been replaced with second-hand wires, purchased cheaply from a scrap dealer. Even worse, the hotel had faked its most recent inspection report, forging the safety engineer's signature. Officials later discovered that dozens of hotels across Cairo had done the same to avoid expensive maintenance fees. Public outrage exploded. The government ordered mass inspections of elevators nationwide, and the Grand Oasis was permanently shut down. Today, the hotel stands deserted, its once grand lobby silent, except for the faint rattle of the elevator doors, still hanging slightly open, as if frozen in that final fatal descent.